We're already on lesson 3. Can you believe that? Already on lesson 3. But anyway, lesson 3, Christ in the fiery furnace. Our memory verse is 1 John 5:21. Little children, keep yourself from idols. Amen. If we get far enough in our lesson, we'll come across that verse, which we'll expound on it then. The emphasis, I'm going to read the junior emphasis. Christ is eternal. Remember, we said that in the first two lessons there of our quarterly. Christ is eternal. Christ didn't just start in the manger there some 2,000 years ago. He did that was not Christ's start, but Brother Weindorf's endeavoring to show us that Christ was appeared on this earth times before that. And so our emphasis is Christ is eternal. He is all-powerful. God protects those who trust and obey Him. We must not worship idols or images. So, that takes a broad swipe of the brush, but our lesson kind of hits on all that. So we're gonna look at that then, and see what we get out of it here. Daniel 3:1. That verse says, Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits, and the breadth thereof 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Basically, the way I figured it out, I said it was, I've already messed up then, because I said 60 cubits, and I was thinking it was 50 feet tall. But it'd even be more than that. That's 60 cubits, and there's 1.5 feet in each cubic. So it'd probably be 90 to 100 feet tall then. So I've already messed up on that. 6 cubits breadth, and I said it's about 10 feet across then, which I might have got that right. But think of this big, huge thing, that he created, or he constructed there. It was something you couldn't hide. It was there, and so we're going to skip on down to the 4th verse, but I want to reassure you what verses 2 and 3 was. The princesses and the governors and the captains and the judges, all the rulers of the province came for a dedication of this image, is what verses 2 and 3 says. They came for a dedication to this hunk of rock or whatever it was made out of, gold. Well, I think it was gold is what it was, but nevertheless, it didn't have no breath. It was useless. Just a useless rock was what it was. And so that's where we're at right now. We're going to go down to verse 4. There's some words in there that I'm not going to be able to pronounce. So if I can get Brother Bayless to read 4, 5, and 6, I'd appreciate that.
Then a herald cried aloud, "To you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at what time you hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. And whoso falleth not down and worshipeth shall the same hour be cast in the midst of a burning fiery furnace."
The king's command. Powerful person. This guy was a powerful person. He ruled the kingdom, the Babylonian kingdom is what it was. This kingdom was what was in power at the time. Very powerful person is what he was. Today we read of another visit of Christ Christ to earth before he was born here. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold. All right? 1, he made an image. 2, he commanded all to worship it. You know, the king that threw Daniel in the lion's den was tricked into that. And he was sorry that he had made that decree against Daniel. That happened sometime after this. But Nebuchadnezzar, he's the one that made the decree of this. He's the one that came up with the idea of forming this thing and setting it up and making it for worship. He commanded all to worship it. That was 2. Number 3, he set a punishment for not worshiping it, to be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. That was the penalty. You know, if we don't follow the laws that are set here, the laws of the land, we're going to suffer some kind of a penalty. You know, if you drive too fast, you're going to get a ticket and you're going to have to pay some money. You know, if you do other things, why, you might wind up in jail, you know. But, you know, they're going to wind up, if anybody doesn't follow what the king says, they're going to wind up in that fiery furnace. In that fiery furnace. To be cast into the midst of the fiery furnace. Now, Brother Weindorf says, worshiping this idol was sin. That's definitely sin. He set an image in the place of God. That's what Nebuchadnezzar did. But, you know, God has a different commandment than that. That commandment is found in Exodus 24:5. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them. That's paraphrased. It's not the whole 2 verses. But thou shalt not bow down to them. God told Moses, he gave him the commandments. And we've been studying the commandments. But this is one of the commandments that he gave Moses. Thou shalt not bow down to any other image. And you know how quickly people forget that. You know, how quickly they forget that. People, they, if you'll just follow the children of Israel and how they were in the wilderness, you know, and then after they got into Canaan and didn't destroy all the inhabitants of Canaan, and how they got consumed into other people's worship and started allowing this to happen. First of all, they started allowing the groves to grow up, you know, and usually the groves was where they had worship services for these gods and stuff, and that's what happens. You know, we as people in our own hearts and lives, as God leads us, we need to stay current with God. We need to review what God has for us each and every day so that we don't fall into a rut like this. Because it's easy to get into a rut or to fall away. You got to stay constant all the time. And then in verse 7, it's not in your quarterly, but that's when they played the stuff, and I think that's when they were to fall down and worship that image, is what it was. Verse 8, wherefore at that time certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews. There was three people there that decided they wasn't going to fall down and worship that image there. Verse 9 and 10, 11, they reminded the king the decree he had made. There was somebody out there that was kind of watching. They wasn't worshiping. They was watching to see what everybody else was doing, wasn't they? Some of them, you know, they were supposed to fall down and worship. But somebody was up looking around, wasn't they? To see these other three guys that wasn't worshiping. But they reminded the king, "Oh, king, didn't you make that decree? And didn't you say this is what's going to happen?" Well, there's some Jews over there that we need to take care of. You know, that was, you know, there's always people watching. There's always people watching. You know, we as people have to live according to what God has for us, because if we only live like that on Sunday and then anywhere else it's different, people's going to see that. They're going to see it. Well, there was people that saw these Jews, and it didn't make any difference whether there was a decree, and they knew what the consequences was. They definitely knew what the consequences was, but you know, they knew that they had to stand up for God. They knew that if they stood up for God, God would stand up for them. It's not a swap-off thing, but it's just a continual thing. You stand up for God, God's going to stand up for you. That's what it is. I read verse 8. Let's go to 12. There are certain Jews whom thou hast set upon the fairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy God, but worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Tattletales. Got some tattletales. You know, you got some that didn't look. I mean, that was looking around, and now they're tattling on the others. 3 who would not obey, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, had been captured in Cana with others and brought to Babylon. They loved God. 3 men went against the greatest king in the world. How dare they? As had been said of another, they feared man so little because they feared God so much. They knew God's law. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them. They obeyed God with no excuse or compromise. They knew His command concerning images. They knew that. You know, we know what we know. You know, that's all we're accountable for, is what we know. They were accountable for what they knew, and they knew what was right, what was wrong there. Some people told the king that these 3 did not worship the golden image. They refused to bow down to it. And like I said, the accusers was looking around instead of worshiping themselves, you know. So, you know, they were looking for trouble. Sounded like they were really looking for trouble is what they were doing. But anyway, they stood up for God. They knew that they had to stand up for God, because one of the 10 commandments, that would be only breaking 1/10 of the commandments, but they knew if they broke 1/10, it would be like breaking them all. That's what they were looking at there. And so we'll go on in then to verse 13 there. I'll try and read this here. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage and fury, commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do not ye serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? How if we be ready Now if ye be ready, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psalteries, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the image which I have made. Well, in other words, if you do that, well, that's good. But if ye worship not, ye shall be cast the same hour into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? Ooh, he's really putting himself up high, ain't he? Yeah. If you fall down and worship, we're going to give you one more chance. If you fall down and worship, we'll just kind of write it off, you know. That's kind of what he's just saying there. We'll just kind of write it off. And but you know, if you don't, then that's what you got to look forward to there. Cast into the furnace. Nebuchadnezzar was very angry. In his rage and fury. In his rage and fury. That would intimidate most men, most people. His rage and his fury, as important a person as he was, king of all this kingdom, you know, highest man, probably the most powerful man in the world, you know, was in rage and fury against these three guys. That would intimidate a lot of people. That would intimidate them. But he called Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego. His rage and fury called them. And he decided that he was going to give them one more chance. And if they still was rebellious, why, they were going to wind up in the fiery furnace there, which nobody can survive that, according to Nebuchadnezzar. Nobody's going to survive that. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? You know, that's what he's saying. He's putting himself above God in that. You know, we never, ever, or anybody should ever get so big-headed as that, you know, that because God's going to get the last say. God's going to get the last word. And he says, who's going to deliver? What kind of a God? What God would deliver you out of my hand? Well, you know, there's a song that we sing every once in a while that I know when I was a child, we used to sing it quite a bit. My God can do anything. There's not nothing that my God cannot do. You know, when he made the whole world, you know, that kind of proved that he can do anything. When he saved my soul, that proved he can do anything. My God can do anything. But he says, and who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hand? Now remember, he didn't say that quietly, you know. He probably said it pretty loud and probably pretty angrily when he said that. What terrible words. He, talk about Nebuchadnezzar, just did not know God. He didn't know who God was. You know, here he sets up this thing and calls that thing a god, you know. And, you know, it sounds to me like he knew that thing couldn't deliver them three Hebrew children out of the fiery furnace. And what's greater than that, you know? That's kind of what was in his mind. What's greater than that? But he didn't know God. He had no idea who God really was. Verse 16 there. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this manner. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thy hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Three guys were in one accord. They were all in agreement. And they says, are we ready to take this? Are we ready to stand this test? I'm looking towards God. You know, Abednego might have said, oh, I'm looking toward God. Shadrach says, well, I am too. Meshach, well, I'm right there with you, boys. We're gonna, if it means death, it's death. But, you know, we're not going to bow to that because God told us not to bow to that. I don't know if they had time to discuss that, but, you know, they were all in one accord. They were all in one mind there. The men had already decided. They had already decided. Our God will deliver us, but if not, we will not serve thy gods. God saw and heard what they said there. God listened. God was listening to them three little old boys. You know, I take these guys as being young. My thoughts has always been that they were probably in their 20s. Now, I don't know. They might have been a little older than that, but I kind of thought they were young. But they knew what they had been taught. You know, they were captive from Canaan. The Babylonian kingdom had come over and captured these Jews and taken them back over to Babylon. Daniel was with them too. Daniel was one of them, but for some reason he wasn't in the picture here. I don't know the reason why, but I know Daniel would have been right there along with them if it would have. But evidently he must have been out doing something, or wasn't there. But these three boys, because if you will remember, they were put to a test when they first came over about what they were supposed to eat, and I think it included all four of them then, and all, and God took care of them, and so here. These three boys was standing without Daniel now. Daniel wasn't there. But if Daniel had been there, I think he'd have been staying there. There'd been four of them there too. But anyway, these three, they had already made up their mind. We're going to serve God. We know that it's wrong to bow or even to monkey around with such stuff. It's kind of like a lot of this stuff that we have to deal with today. We don't have it so much now. You don't see them all that much. But, when we were growing up, the Ouija boards, and stuff like that. I was taught, folks says, stay away from them things. Stay away from them things, because they told me, they said, we're not sure whether that can cause devil possession, but why play with it? It's not worth it. And that was one thing that more or less, I don't want to be affiliated with anything like that. And they knew that if they bowed down, they had the assurance if they bowed down to such a thing as that they would lose out with God, and they knew that, and they had made up their mind. Lord, you're the only one that we're going to serve. I'm the only one you're the only one I'm going to serve. Each one of them had to say that on their own. One of them just didn't make up the mind, and the other one says, yeah, we'll go along with you, But each one of them had to have their own personal dedication to God, more or less. And that's the way it is in salvation. We have to, each one of us, have our own dedication. We can't get saved for our children. Our parents can't get saved for us. We can't get saved for our parents. But Each one of us have to have our own dedication with God there. Going into verse 19. Then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, even again. And the form of his, help me out with that word there. Visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Visage, countenance. What was on his face there is what he's talking about. Don't you think maybe red might have been the color of his? Don't you think maybe the blood vessels kind of popped out on him? He was angry. You know, when you see an angry person, you see aggression, you know. You see redness pop out. I don't like to see angry people. You know, their blood vessels pop out and they get red and they like they got real high blood pressure and probably do have. You know, well that's the way Nebuchadnezzar was. Therefore he spake and commanded that they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it was wont to be heated. And he commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Was it really that hot? Was it really that hot, you know? I've got a fireplace. I've had it now for 2 or 3 years now. And you know, there's different temperatures that you can set that fireplace on, you know. Depending on the wood that you're using, depending on how much wood you put in it, depending on how you feed it, you know. Well, he didn't make no mistake here. He wanted it hot. He wanted it hot. You know, and looking at it with your earthly eyes, nothing could survive that. Nothing could survive. No human could survive that. Verse 21 said, Then these men were bound in their coats and hosieries and their hats and their other garments and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace there. The king's anger grew tremendously, full of fury. His countenance was changed. He commanded to heat the furnace 7 times more. And he bound or tied them in and threw them in. That would be the last of them, he thought. Well, I'll just three little reprobates, I'm going to get rid of them. You know, just kind of what he looked at them on as. That's what he thought. In addition, it would be a lesson to all who dared to disobey his orders. That would be an example. I'm going to use these 3 as an example of the power that I've got. You know, that's what he's kind of talking about. If we would read verses 22 and 23, it says, as them big, strong men, what did he say in 21 there? He says, 20, in verse 21, the most mighty men that were in his army, well, the flames leaped out and got them and killed them. I don't know how many of them it killed, but I mean, just the flames coming out. They wasn't even in the furnace. They were just coming out, what got them and killed them. You know, it just seemed like Nebuchadnezzar was pretty cold-hearted, don't it? You know, to allow his own men to die like that. But that shows how much fury and how much anger he had toward these three guys. That's what it really showed. It showed how much anger he really had. Verse 24 says, Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was help me out on that word. Astonished. Astonished. He rose up in haste. Something caught his eye there, and spake, and said unto his counselors, Did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, True, O king. He answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. Wow, wow. You know, the 4th one wasn't one of his mighty men that got killed, you know, and he recognized that. He says, there's 4 walking around in there, we only throw 3. What's going on here? You know, God opened his eyes and showed him that there's more to it than that old big tall mess that he had made there, you know. The miracle. Nebuchadnezzar took one look. It changed him. Astonishedly, he rose up and he spake. And he asked the question, Did not we cast 3 men bound? I see 4 men, and all of them's loose and walking around. They have no hurt. How is that possible? You know, he asked what God's going to deliver you. You know, he got an eye-opener there. However, greater yet, the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. He said that. He said that. Nebuchadnezzar said that. It woke him up, you know. Jesus Christ had come from heaven to walk with these 3 men. Jesus Christ had come to walk with these 3 men. Anytime that an angel came from heaven or Jesus came from heaven, he usually had a message to deliver, whether it be spoken or unspoken. He had a message, you know. And, you know, this was one time that Jesus says, we're going to take care of these 3 boys. You know, he could have said, okay, well, you know, they'll die here, they'll come to heaven, you know. But no, this was one time that there was work that had to be done. Nebuchadnezzar had to have his eyes open. And if we fast forward, wasn't Nebuchadnezzar the one that went out in the wild, wound up in the wild, see? Okay, see, that was another thing that God was preparing him for. Remember what you see. Remember what you see. He didn't tell him that, but you know, that probably come across Nebuchadnezzar's mind years later than, you know, there's somebody out there greater than me. And he realized that. These boys stood on their feet, but they had the Spirit of God standing with them. They had Jesus Christ in there. Don't you think that when they were in that fire, that what were they doing in that fire with Jesus? It don't say what they were doing, but you know, they wasn't scared of Jesus. You know, sometimes when, well, just like John on the Isle of Patmos, he saw Jesus, you know, and he was scared, you know. But you know, these boys, they wasn't scared. They realized, hey, our protector is here. Our protector is here. You know, they got a blessing that day. That fire was supposed to be so hot that they couldn't, it would just disintegrate them just pretty quick, you know. Can you imagine how fast it would have singed the hair on their head? You know, how fast it would have, You know, you can hold I know we used to dress chickens and, you know, the little fine feathers, you know, just hold it over that fire, and that fire not that hot either. Just hold it over there just a little bit and it singe it just real quick. Hair on my arms, you know, every once in a while I'll get hot and it'll singe the hair on your arms, and it don't take a whole lot. It don't burn the skin. It just singes the hair. That's how quick it does that. They didn't even have that. We're going to find that out here in a little bit. But they didn't even have that. And that thing was heated 7 times hotter than it normally is, you know. Well, we've seen what happened to the mighty men. They wasn't weaklings. They wasn't the sickly ones. They was the mighty men of the army and what it did to them. Well, let's go on here. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spake and said, listen to what he says here. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God, come forth and come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth of the midst of the fire. He didn't call for that fourth one, did he? He didn't call for the fourth one. He'd seen enough. He'd seen enough there. The princes, governors, and captains, and the king's counselors, being gathered together, saw these men, upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was a hair of their head singed, neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of fire had passed on them. You know, they were walking around in there free. Before they went in, they were bound. But they were bound with the king's ropes, I think. My thoughts is they were bound with the king's ropes. And I assume that them ropes got burnt just pretty quick. Right away. But you know, their clothes, how did their clothes not burn? Jesus was there. Jesus was there. My God can do anything. My God can do anything. The king called to them, ye servants of the Most High God, come forth. You know, his attitude kind of changed there, didn't it? He speaks differently of God now. They looked the men over, not a burn or a hair singed, clothes not burnt, not even the smell of fire. You know, I love to burn a brush pile. A lot of times when we go up to Missouri, and of course my sisters do the same thing. They love burning brush piles, you know, and all. And usually Patty and Delbert has a brush pile where limbs fall out of the tree, and they'll pile them up, you know, and usually just wait for all of us to get together, and they'll light that fire, and we'll have a weenie roast or something, you know. And you know, you can be down upwind of the smoke, and you can still get smoke on your clothes. And when that gets in your clothes, the only way to get it out is wash them. That's about the only way you can get it out of smoke out of your clothes. Well, these guys was right in the middle of the fire, and not even the smoke. Not even the smoke was on there. Not even the smell of fire. It was an indisputable miracle indeed. Can you wrap your arms around that, you know? It's hard to fathom, but you know, my God can do anything. God is a living God. If you want power in your life, let Him in your heart. You know, you may not be delivered from fire, but we can be delivered from sin. That's what's very important. We may not be delivered from a fire like that, but we can be delivered from sin, and we can appreciate that. Not even the smell. Their clothes was not burned. First of all, their clothes would have burnt first. the hair on their head would have singed off just right away, you know. And they might have lived for just a little while, but, you know, they would have been dead, you know, normally. That's what would have happened, you know. Because we see what the mighty men happened to them. They died right away. But, you know, God was there with them. Let's go into verse 28 then. Then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, Blessed, I like that word, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He didn't even know, he didn't know what kind of a God they were serving before. Now he got a taste of it. He sees what kind of a God. It opened his eyes. But he associates the God with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You know, the way these guys performed, we need to do the same thing. It is kind of what he was looking at. We need to do the same thing. He says, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him, and has changed the king's word and yielded their bodies, that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God. You know, these boys, they were not sure whether they were going to be delivered, and that's not what depended their answer to the king. They knew it was wrong, and they told the king, they said, he's able to deliver us from the fiery furnace, but if he don't, I want you to know that we did not fall down worship. It wasn't, their answer was not dependent upon their survival, literal survival. That's what I'm trying to say there. They had already made up their mind. And they were willing to go to their death, you know. And then this all happened, and the king wakes up and says, okay, there is a God. There is somebody greater than me. You know, that's kind of what he was saying there. Nebuchadnezzar had seen Jesus Christ. He had seen what he did. He had seen what Jesus did. He was convinced, and he made another decree. And that decree, let's read 29. Therefore, I make a decree that every people, nation, and language which speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made a dunghill, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. You know, the question was, who's going to deliver you from that? Now he's saying, there's no other God that could do that. That little thing that I resurrected over there or raised up, he's not able to do that. And he realized that. No, let's see, now it was not a command to worship the image. No, it was that no one should speak anything amiss against God. That's what he said now. He said, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. There is no other God that can deliver after this sort. After this sort. He realized. Moreover, there is no other God that can save us. And that's true. That's bringing it right down to us. There's no other God. No other God that can save us. Only God. There's no other way to God but through Jesus Christ. That's the only way we can be redeemed of our sins is through Jesus Christ. Our last verse there is our memory verse, 1 John 5:21. This is the John that was the disciple of Jesus. And he says, little children, keep yourself from idols. Amen. That's our memory verse. Keep yourself from idols. use no image, medals, charms, pictures, or articles of any kind to set up, pray before, carry, or trust in. That's what an image is. That's what God was talking about in the Ten Commandments. There's no other God. Take the one true God in your heart. You don't have to have a picture of Him. You don't have to have something to remind you that you got Him, but take Him in your heart. That's what He's saying. Trust in the living God only. Trust in the living God. You know, we are promised that God will take care of us. And, you know, if we will put our trust and our confidence in God, we will never be let down. Oh, we're gonna meet distractions. We're gonna meet different circumstances that are going to be a question in our mind, and you know, it's going to be a problem in our mind. But you know, that's one thing we can do. We can lay it on, give it to God, and say, Lord, here, I don't know what the outcome is going to be, but you already know what the outcome is. You know how to take care of this. Leave it there, you know. Give it to Him and leave it. Don't leave it there for a while and then pick it back up, but leave it in His care. He will take care of it. Effective. I'm going to read this effective faith. I like this reading here that was in the points to consider. Sometimes we think we could trust more easily if we could just see with our eyes proof of God's power. No. Faith is not dependent upon outward sight and sound. It is the evidence of things not seen. Don't you remember Hebrews explaining what faith is? It's the things hoped for. The evidence of things not seen is what it is. That's found in Hebrews 11:1. Nebuchadnezzar had abundant outward proof of God, yet he was slow to trust Him. In Daniel 4, we see what it took to cause him to give up himself and to give the praise to God. It is not enough to acknowledge God's existence and power. That's not enough. You know, the devils, it says they acknowledge that, but they even do more than that. They tremble, you know. And so that's not enough. We must take Him as ours and separate ourselves to Him. And you know, never let temptation overcome you. You know, God says that I will not let a temptation come that's stronger than what you can handle. I'll be right there with you. I'll carry you through. Sometimes it does seem like temptation or trials is heavy on us. But you know, that's one promise that we can have. Lord, you said that. I trust in that. I know that you can carry me through. And I'm going to leave it with you there and put my trust even more in you. And you know, that's very, very good advice there. Nebuchadnezzar, let's don't get to a point where Nebuchadnezzar was, you know, that not know God and have to be awakened in such a manner. Jesus is eternal. Jesus, like I said, and I'm going to probably say it several times, He didn't start at Bethlehem in the manger. This was a true example of Jesus coming here before His birth there. I'm going to leave that with you. Our lesson next week is Prophecies of Christ, Dan.